My name is Don Coyes, and I'm with president of White Bison here in Colorado Springs. And with me here is Marlin Farley from White Earth. And we've been talking for a couple of years that maybe it would be worthwhile for us to have a conversation about sponsorship and about recovery in Indian country and how do we help one another get sober and stay sober. And last August 10th, I celebrated 33 years of sobriety. So during that time, I've seen a lot of changes in Indian country around sobriety and sobriety powwows and powwow sobriety activities over New Year's Eve. And there's all types of roundups. And so there's been a lot of change in Indian country in terms of the sobriety movement that's going among our tribes. And when I come into recovery, by then I had drank enough and caused enough problems. I lost my family, I lost my self-respect, and I had done a lot of things that I didn't want to do. And all that going on, I couldn't quit drinking until I came to a recovery program. And I wasn't in that recovery program very long, and one of the things I found out I needed to do was to have some help. And so I needed to get me a sponsor. So I was told, they said, you just go to meetings and you watch, and you look at that person and look for that person that seems to have what you want, meaning it's somebody who I observed on how they handle problems. I was able to say this is a spiritual person. I was able to say that it was a family person, and this person wasn't perfect, but it seemed like they knew how to solve problems and how to work through things, and that's what I didn't know. So I finally got up enough nerve to go ask this man if he would help me, if he'd sponsor me. And he said, well, we'll talk about it. So we had this chat about what a sponsorship is and what he would do and what he wouldn't do. And I was pretty clear by the time we got done. Like he said, I'm not your taxi cab. So I knew he wasn't going to be picking me up. And I'm not your banker, so I knew he wasn't going to be loaning me money. And I'm not your hotel. So he talked like that, and but one thing he did say is he said, I'll be your friend. And he said, that doesn't mean I'll ever recall that once I decide to be your friend, it's your friend for life. No matter what you do or don't do, he said, I'll be your friend. And then the other thing he told me is he said the only way that he knew how this program AA worked, he said, was by that big book. And in that big book, he said there's 12 steps. And he said that he would be willing to guide me and show me in that big book where those instructions were. And so he also gave me a little list of suggested meetings that I go to. And so with his help and guidance, I was taken on a journey about something I'm really glad I didn't do it myself, because I guess it'd be like climbing a mountain. That man had climbed that mountain, and he knew what tools to use over certain situations, in my life. And so I did that. I went through those steps, and I remember thinking to myself, I said, I'm going to do this thing through the 5th step, and if I don't notice a difference, after I get down to the 5th step, I'm not doing it. And so I went ahead and I did my inventory and did everything that it was told. And when I got done with that 5th step, I started to realize something was changing inside of myself. I was behaving different. My kids was noticing it. My spouse at that time, she was noticing something was different, and I was handling problems different. So I continued to do that. And so that's the path in recovery that I chose to do, was those 12 steps in that recovery program. Then on his suggestion, he suggested that I go through that set of steps every year. And so I do. Every year I go back to those 12 steps. I go back to that book and I read through those. Then when I was about 4 years sober, I switched sponsors. And so I run into a man, Johnny Looking Cloud, and he's the one that really knew the culture. He was sober a long, long, long time. He was actually both a Christian and he was a traditional man. But in his mind, he didn't see it as two different ways. He only saw it as one way. So with his help, I started to see where those steps really fit into the culture, and I was able to do certain ceremonies that he showed me, along with those 12 steps. And so I believe that I was very fortunate in my recovery, to run into the men who have led me through that work. It's scary for me to think that somebody else would have done it, because that person had the insight to know when I was lying, and he had the insight to know when I needed a hug and when I needed a kick in the rear. He just had this insight to know. But 32 years later, he made his journey, and that very first talk that we had, where he said, "I'll be your friend forever." For the rest of life, it was that way. That man continued to guide me and show me deeper ways of working the work and deeper ways, of working the steps. And so I guess the way that works, then eventually somebody sitting in the meeting there is watching me. Probably looking at, was I walking the walk? Was I really working the steps? How was I handling problems? And then eventually I got asked to sponsor people. And of course, I kind of sponsored them how I was sponsored. I started out with them, well, I'm not your taxi cab, I'm not your motel. The same old thing. The only thing I know is doing it by this book. And so that was how it was passed down from one person to another. I happened to be fortunate enough to get somebody who realized that this program in working the steps, it was about life and death. This was about whether I would drink again or not. That's what that was about. And he always kept me focused on, even I go to him with a problem. We'd talk through the problem, he'd say, "No, this has to do whether you're going to drink again or not. What are you going to do?" So he always kept me focused, on my recovery. So maybe, Marlin, you could share a little bit what your experience with how you were sponsored, and how did that work for you?
Like Don said, my name is Marlin Farley. My Indian name is Blackstone. In my language, you say Makadea Sin. I come from the White Earth Nation in northwest Minnesota. And I am a proud member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's how I got my wellness and sobriety initially. But when I first got into this thing, I remember I was in a treatment center, and boy, I gave all of myself to that treatment and to beginning to work those steps. And I had a counselor there, and she said that if you want to keep what you have, when you get back home, that there needs to be some changes in your life. She said one of the things you got to do is you got to find a new playpen to play in. And then she said you got to find some new playmates to play with when you get back home. And hell, that scared me, because I didn't know where that healthy playpen was. I didn't know where I was going to go besides bars or casinos. And I really didn't have an understanding about who in the heck was out there that was sober. But as I got a ride back home, back to my reservation from that treatment center in southern Minnesota, back to White Earth, there was a man there that worked for a chemical dependency program, and he shared with me that he was an AA man. And before I left that treatment center, that counselor, she said one more thing. She said, the first thing you do when you get back home is you get to those AA meetings and you find yourself a good sponsor. So that man that picked me up from that treatment center and taking me back home became my sponsor. And how he sponsored me to me was incredible. He was doing things that I never thought another human being would do for another human being. One, he would drive about 100 miles, 2-3 nights a week to pick me up, take me to a meeting, take me back home. See, at that time, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a license, I didn't have those things. And I was really dependent on somebody else to help me out. And that man helped me to learn how to ask for help. I remember as he would do that, I would reach into my pocket and I would try to give him money for gas just to help him out, to put gas in his tank. And he'd say, I don't want to take your money at all. He said, what I want you to do, he said, when you get your car and you get your license back, because I want you to reach out and you help the next one come into this program. And you don't ask for money. That's how that thing started. He showed me that it was important to go to those meetings. It was important that I was working steps. It was important for him to teach me about service work, to reach out to help others, those that were still struggling. And he got me involved in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous right away. He got me very actively involved in that. And now that one there, he didn't work a lot of steps with me. He had me do a lot of reading. He had me do a lot of service work. And he taught me how to have fun in my recovery and sobriety. We started to do things that I never thought I was ever able to do, and that was to have fun without alcohol in my life. But he showed me how to do that, and I thought that was very important. Then I went on to other sponsors, but as I was going to those meetings and doing exactly as I was told, there was something inside that was missing in my life. I didn't feel whole. I didn't feel complete. And it was in 2002 that there was a buzz going around the recovery community on our reservation. And they said if you would just call up this place called White Bison, that you would be able to get a free book. And that book is this one right here. It's called The Red Road to Sobriety in the Native American Way. And it was through this book that I began to take a look at how my recovery program would look in a different way. As I started to find out that I could go back and then return to my culture, go back to the elders, ask for help, and then I would begin to work those steps as I started to see that it was through those spiritual principles that I would begin to change my life and how it would change my thinking. It would change the way that I treated other people, and most of all, it allowed me to change how I was treating myself. And suddenly, as I returned to the sweat lodge and I returned to ceremonies, still going to those AA meetings, that I found myself feeling whole and complete once again. And it was through that culture and working those steps and doing them hand in hand. That's what I found out worked. And so I had to find other sponsors throughout the last 10 years of my recovery. So, so one of the things that I learned from sponsors was this, is that as they would teach me what they knew, because they reached out and went to others, they had their sponsors. One of the things that I find is very, very important in how I was sponsored was that my sponsor, he didn't attach himself to the outcome. He would give me the work, and which really meant this, is that he was open to an outcome, but he knew that he wasn't responsible for the outcome itself. And that it would be between me and Creator that work would get done. And as a result of how I was sponsored in this new way to me was this through the Medicine Wheel 12-step. I had learned to be able to incorporate the culture, the ceremonies, the steps into my recovery program. And it was through a series of videotapes that White Bison had produced, that I would begin to be able to apply those steps into my daily living. And I know that I would never have got there if it wasn't for the help of people like Don and others in the program that have been patient with me. Sometimes they had to be very firm with me, very loving with me. And I think what worked probably best for me was that I had folks in my life, sponsors in my life, that if I needed to call them at 3 o'clock in the morning, they were there to pick up that phone at 3 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes they didn't have to say anything, they just had to listen to me. And it seems like there's a power to just being able to trust somebody enough to tell them what's going on with me. And somehow that problem that I had would just disappear. So one of the questions I got for you, Don, is, how is it that you sponsor people today? What do you do to sponsor others?
Well, one thing that I do today, and I think I did that because my sponsor did that for me, was when we talked about stuff, and sometimes it might not be a big thing to somebody else, but it was a big thing to me. And I never, in all those years, ever heard him repeat anything that I said. And so I had a lot of trust when I found out that he wasn't telling his friends, or it didn't come back around the grapevine, that he never ever told anything. Then I had a lot of trust for him. Then I was able to share more intimate things and more secret things. So that was one of the things I learned, that when I work with other people, I don't say what was discussed between me and that person, or I don't get fancy. I don't like say, well, I don't want to say this name, but that guy that wears the blue shirt and brown hat or whatever. So I learned that it was really an honor that when somebody confides in you things that may not be big to you, but it's big to them. And I think one thing I learned from my sponsor too was he was sober 15 years when I started working with him, and he didn't try to take me where he was at. He worked with me where I was at, and it was he never made me feel dumb or stupid or whatever, because he had this insight to see where I was in my life and trying to get a marriage back together and struggling with the kids and finances and all those things. And so what he did do whenever I would take those issues there is he would tell me the solution to that is in that book. And so then that's what I do when I work with people. Then I say the solution is there. Now, one of the initial talks that we had, I think what he wanted to know was, before he would start to work with me, he talked. We had a talk. And that's what I do now. I have a talk with them. And what I want to know from them is if they're willing to go the distance. I want to know if they're willing to go to any length to do that work on themselves. Are they serious? You hear all sorts of things in a program. You'll hear like, oh, you don't work the steps work you, and you hear all this stuff. But when I made a commitment to do that work, that was a priority in my life. It wasn't like something I do whenever I had time. That was a high, because this is about whether I live or died. So it had to be a high priority, because the way I was in my relationship with alcohol, it was killing me. I was dying from it. And so I took my sobriety very, very serious. And so he wanted to know whether I was going to do the work, whether I was serious about it or not. And so that's what I did. And so that's what I look for. So I remember the first time we looked at that book, he opened it up to that page where the 12 steps were. And he asked me 2 questions I was to answer for each of those 12 steps. I was to read the step and then say, question number 1, do I want to do it? And then question number 2 was, are you willing to go to any length? And so I had to go through all 12 of those and come back to him and say, yeah, I want to do this. And yeah, I'm willing to go to any length. And so I don't like to mess around with people who aren't serious about it. I like to have this sense that this is about whether they live or die. And when I get that feeling from them that that's what they're serious about it, I'll do anything. I show up. Now, one other thing about him that was really good was his word was good to me. And when he'd say he'd be there Monday, he was there. And when he'd say this should be at this meeting or whatever, he showed up. And so I try to do that. I try to show up. So the way I like to work it is I like to have a rhythm when I work with somebody. Every Friday, that's that time, I set aside that time for them. And to do it alone now. Myself, I don't sponsor people of the other sex. Now, there's people that do that. I was taught that because that's how he did it. He said that it is most effective if men work with men and women work with women. And so that's kind of how I work it too. And so the way that I do that with them is I do it right by the book. These are the pages you work for step 1. These are the pages you work for step 2. And I don't think that the way I was taught that in working those steps, like I know some in AA, when they work those steps, they just read step 1 and they say, you powerless? Yep. Your life unmanageable? Yep. Okay, you're on for step 2. That wasn't the way we worked at it. When he took me through that work, I had to look at I had to be able to tell him in my own words what that meant that I was powerless over alcohol. And then later on I learned about mind mapping, and it was the same as unmanageability. And so that's how I work with them. I like people who is really serious about their recovery. And you can usually tell, their book isn't clean. That book is dirty. Mine's the way mine is. It's underlined, pages torn. It don't hang together. Got to have it by rubber bands. And I think that's a sign that you got somebody who's studying that book, not just reading it one time, but studying that book. And so I learned to do like the 5th step, about that, and I read the instructions before the 5th step, so they don't have to tell me everything. If there's something they want to tell, a pastor or a minister or a medicine man that they don't want to tell me, that's okay. Because that work is really between them and the Creator. That's who it's really between, setting yourself right with God. And I also learned this in my observations over the years is AA isn't the only way to get sober. That's not the only way. That is one way. And that's the way I can talk to them about it because that was the way that I chose. I know people that have gone to the Sundance, through those ceremonies, and they don't drink. And I know people that go to the church, and some go to the church and work steps, around that manner. And so that works too. And so I think there's many ways that people come to this path, of recovery. I can help people. But of course I know some that go to the sweat and work steps, and that seems to be a real good combination, where they get that native spirituality and that they also get that steps. Because the way that Johnny Lookencloud told me one is, he said, a long time ago we always lived in harmony with the earth. And then he said, when you take the alcohol, for those who have that disease, alcoholism, then it takes you out of harmony. And he said, those 12 steps is a natural order of how you come back. You got to start with number 1, then to 2, you can't jump around. And when you come back to that way, then all of a sudden you're back to way it was normally should be, and then life starts to straighten out, and that's the way that I tend to sponsor how I was sponsored because it worked for me, and I watched people come to AA and they don't work steps. They are different than the ones who come to AA and do work steps. Life breaks just a little bit different for them. And I was never promised a rose garden or anything in recovery. I've had bad luck, but they told me I could stay sober through it. And I've experienced death of loved ones that I was close to and didn't have to drink, and lost jobs, didn't have to drink. And they told me that what that program was about was never drinking again. You don't have to ever drink again. But they didn't promise me that things wouldn't happen, and that's how I talk to people, that I work with. And then the way that I do it is I tell them, I'll sponsor you through one set of steps. After that, I'm your friend. We help one another then. And so I have on many occasions gone to see people that I know who have gone through the work and with my own problems. And that's the way I was sponsored the first time through. He said, I'll take you through this work, and when we're done, then we're friends. So I know that it's been a benefit because sometimes my alcoholic thinking, it's really weird. And sometimes only another alcoholic can understand that I'm weird. And I think we have two sets of friends when we get in recovery. We have one set of friends that'll tell us what we want to hear, but the other ones, I think there's a set of friends, like in the program, they'll tell you what you need to hear, and that's the one who loved me enough to say those things out loud, even if you're sober a long time. It's those friends I like that are able to spot when I'm off track. We watch one another. You and I do that. Many, many years we watch one another, and one another gets off track, you're not afraid. You love that person enough to tell them. And I guess that's what that fellowship is about, is you end up with a group of people that would not just help you with your sobriety, but they'll help you move, and you can have fun with them and fish with them and fellowship with them, and even our families, hang out and things together. And so far what they told me, if I did certain things, having this disease, alcoholism, I wouldn't have to drink again. And many, many, many people that I work with, they're doing the same thing, and they're still sober. A long, long, long time.
So how I sponsor people, some of that information that came from elders, I talked about that relationships will be the most important thing that you have in your life. And in order to have these relationships, that you have to have an understanding of a couple things. One, they said, is that you got to have trust in that relationship. And they said another one, that if you're going to reach out and help others, is that they really need to find a sense of belonging somewhere. And boy, when I first got to that, around those tables, and my sponsor was taking me to those meetings, at first it was pretty scary. I didn't trust anybody. I didn't know where I belonged. Hell, I was in bars for 25 years of my life, and I didn't know how to have healthy relationships, and I had never had a set of reliable friends in my life. But I got to those tables, and I found a sense of trust and a sense of belonging there. And it's through that teaching that I found out that I'm most effective when I develop a real close relationship that's built off of trust, and then I can hook the sponsee into feeling this sense of belonging to wherever that meeting is, and that seems to help. I'm like you. I really feel that my role and responsibility as a sponsor is really to guide the sponsee through those 12 steps, to get them to that place where they're going to have that spiritual experience, and that means working those first 11 steps, and then to get out there and start to do some service work. I want my sponsees to be able to experience three things, and that's in that triad of Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says this: unity. To have that sense of unity together. To have a sense of recovery, to be able to work those steps and to allow that sponsee to feel how it feels to give back, service work. So yeah, I think fellowship is so important. Working steps are very important, to teach them how to work the steps. Teach them how to have fun with each other in that fellowship. How to have relationships built off of trust, and for them to get a sense of belonging, that when they go back to that meeting, that they have that feeling that says, man, I belong here and I want to keep coming back to this thing. And if I can help that process, then I know I'm doing my job. But I also want my sponsees to feel that the importance of reaching out, helping others. That service work is important, so that if they can experience those three things, then I think I can be effective as a sponsor. One of the things that was difficult for me, because when I got out of treatment and I worked the steps, I started to get asked, Marlin, will you sponsor me? And the big question I always had for myself is, well, when should somebody start sponsoring folks, And in our community, I was kind of forced to have to start doing that right away in my program. I know that within the first year that I was already starting to sponsor folks. But so my question to you, Don, is like, when should somebody start sponsoring others, helping out others that way, to take them through those 12 steps?
Well, I don't think there's a rule when to do that. I think almost as soon as you are in sobriety and you're holding your head up, I think that's a sign that you're starting to see. Because a lot of times you're running with your head down and you're looking down because of the shame or guilt or feelings of not being worthy, and who am I to sponsor? And I think, in the old days in our communities, what our communities was known for was always helping one another. We were not selfish. We would help one another. Even you'd see people that having a hard time helping themselves, they would turn around and help, another person. So I think as soon as you got some idea of what to do during problems or during situations, I think sometimes you can just help by listening. You don't even have to have the answer, that you can do that. So I know I remember first time little John, they call him, he come up and he said, "Oh, would you be my sponsor?" And man, my mouth went dry, and so I was really cool. I said, "Well, let me pray about it." But I didn't really pray about it that night. I run to the phone, I call my sponsor. I said, "This guy's asking me to sponsor him." And then he said, "Well, what are you calling me for? Why don't you go help him?" But I wasn't through a whole set of steps yet. I was on, I think, step 6 is what I was on, and he came in. So in some ways, I had to really do the work, because that little John, he was after it. He didn't so I had to keep ahead of him. And so in a way, he was really helping me, stay ahead of him. So I think that it doesn't take very long when you, and I think especially if you're Native people, you never really lose your contact with the Creator. It's just built in our DNA. And I think as soon as you can get enough of a prayer together to ask the Creator, says, "What am I supposed to do to help this person? I want you to guide me. I'll go see them, or I'll drive and see them, or whatever it is. I'm willing to do that." So I guess that's a form of sponsorship, is giving them a ride to work and the coffee chats afterwards, and sharing your experience, what happened to you, and what's it like now, and what are you doing. I think all those things are helping. But I think that if you are taking a person through the 12 steps, you're going to have to be in them, ahead of them, anyway, or through them. And it's like anything else. The more you do it, the more experience you got. Then you can help. So I don't think it has to do with how you feel at that time. In that big book, it talks about that often only a drunk can help a drunk. And I remember that one tape that you gave me about this guy from, was it LCO or, anyway, he was talking in there about power. And one of the things he said is that there's people, a lot of powerful people. There's lawyers and doctors and policemen and everything else. But he said there's a very special power that is only given to an alcoholic. It's not given to counselors necessarily, or it's not given to policemen, lawyers, people with master's degrees, doctor's degrees. This power is only given to an alcoholic. You're the only one has a special power. And what he went on to say is that power that you are given is that power when you go help another person in recovery, another drunk, they'll believe you. You have that power to help them. And I think that has to do with answering that question. As soon as you realize that you have that very, very special power, and that power is, in some cases, you don't know all the big words, you don't know all that, you only can tell this is what happened to me, and this is what I'm doing now, and that drunk will believe you. That's the power. So I think one thing we know is sponsorship has been good, and I think AA started in 1935, and through many, many years, they have come up there. It's grown really big. Sponsorship has really helped, and I think that's all been good. But in our communities a long time ago, what we were known for is always helping one another. And I really like this new idea that's coming out. And this isn't to compete with AA. AA is going to still go. It's still going to have sponsorships. But to me, this new idea that they're coming out with, called recovery coaches, and we're calling them the sobriety recovery coaches. And what I like about that is it's not a closed thing. It's not just the AA thing. So AA is fine, and it's running like how it's running. But as things evolve and change, then there's new ideas come out and new ways to do things. And I think that's what's happening with these recovery coaches. And it's kind of going back to like how my sponsor, he told me the things he wasn't. And that's kind of a general accepted thing in AA a lot. But this thing, what it says is that I'm going to go to different links to help out. And so I think it's out of respect for AA, you got to follow those guidelines, leave it like it is, and leave a sponsorship like it is. But this is another way that we can help one another in this recovery coach idea. So you're not a sponsor. That's not what we're going to talk about here. It's about a different way of helping, and it's about when a person comes into recovery and they need some help. It's about one thing. It's about learning as a recovery coach what are the community resources to build relationships, like to maybe mental health or to behavioral health or to treatment or wherever it is. And you're kind of a person who says, I'm going to use other resources to help. Where my sponsor says, I'm not your taxi cab, you say, I'm your taxi cab. And where he says, I'm not your hotel, you say, I'm going to find you housing. And if you got to get driver's license and you can't read, I'll help you read. I'll help you get that. So it's an additional effort, kind of like the old days of helping where you need to help and yet not being codependent or not letting anybody use you, but to make that extra effort, because we know that the alcoholism problems is big in our country, and we got to use whatever resources that we have. And so that says you could be a recovery coach, but you could help a person go to the sweat, or you could take them there, or run it or whatever you do, or maybe it's church, then you can help them if that's the way that that person wants. And I think it's sort of like you got to really listen to them and let them be guided on how to pick what will best work for them. And so I can see that it's not like an AA sponsor. It's kind of like a traditional way of how we used to do it to help one another. And maybe you connect them to elders, and maybe you connect them to ceremonies, and maybe you take all those things that's available to us in our communities, take them to meetings, and if they want to do it that Red Road Book way, then help them do it that way. And if they want to do it to AA, you take them there. But it's sort of like, our people are like gold. Everyone is important. We should never give up. We have to quit stopping when we see, like, maybe in town, you see a drunk laying on a sidewalk. We got to quit stepping over them. Remember how that one woman said we got to help them. And I think we have a lot of our relatives have come back from recovery from the wars, from Vietnam and Iraq, and and they're struggling, and to help use those resources. So I really like this idea of the recovery coach. I like that name. It's not recovery boss, or it's not recovery dad. It's recovery coach. Is that you do whatever you can to help them and to coach them and encourage them and motivate them, and if they slip, go after them, and so I really like this idea of the recovery coach concept.
So what Don and I have been doing is to develop a recovery coach, a sobriety recovery coach curriculum that is now available to communities, to individuals across Indian country to come and to get that training. That the recovery coach is really an advocate. That person is an advocate for our people to hook them, to link them to the recovery community. Mm-hmm. They're an advocate to help find housing, to get to that meeting, to get to that sweat lodge, to all the community linkages or resources that we have. Is that person really is the connector. A recovery coach is not a therapist. They're not a counselor. They're not the doctor, the clergy, the nurse. But they really are. In our language, we call it Oshkabewis, which means a helper. Like Don said, that recovery coach is really a helper. Now, today as I travel across Indian country doing training is that we know that there's a lot of recovery coaches that are now they're in the very beginning stages of coaching others in recovery. Many of them are being paid to do that job. Some are doing it as volunteers. But we know that there's a lot of recovery coaches that are out there doing that work now. And there is a difference between what the addiction counselor is doing from the sponsor. There's a difference between what the addiction counselor and the sponsor are doing and the recovery coach. At this point is that the recovery coach sometimes is not even formally trained yet. And then there's some that are seeking training, but they don't have to be that professional. They don't have to have that 4-year degree. I think what they have to have is to have that heart, that love for, that concern for others, to reach out, to help them, to be that connector, and to do it in a good way like that. So we're really excited about recovery coaching. I know that in my life I've had several recovery coaches that have touched my life and helped improve my standard of living, and they didn't even know that they were my recovery coach, but that's what they were doing, and they didn't even know it. And I know, Don, you've been an incredible recovery coach to me, and I just want to say thank you for that.
Okay, well, I think we're on the beginning of an additional way to help all the people. If you want any information about recovery coach training, you can just send an email to info@whitebison.org, or you can refer to the White Bison website, www.whitebison.org, and I hope that we just end up with thousands and thousands of us coaches helping one another to get our communities to be safe and sober, and to bring everyone back to the culture, their spiritual path. So thank you very much for allowing us to spend this time with you on the video.
Nope.